You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this first ever paranormal concept in 2020. I hope you all had a really good New Year and a good Christmas. And now we're all back to normal, or struggling to get back to normal. I know I am. What about you, Kerry?
Yes, it's been getting back to work. It's like you have a break and you stop, don't you? Particularly over the Christmas period because you've got so much else to do. And then it's like, right, okay, so what we're doing, we get back to work and everything. But I work in retail, so I didn't really kind of stop on my like day-to-day life. But it was nice to have a break from the radio. But I'm like literally chomping at the bit to get back to it because I've had so many ideas and I'm on fire at the moment. So make the most of it. I'll burn out by February.
Oh, I don't know. I have the 2-week break and then just struggle to get back into it. It's just a nightmare, and I've got so much to do. As I said when I said to you off like earlier, I've got so much to do. I need a month to do everything that I need to do, but I've got to do it before Friday.
So he's delegating. Everybody is delegating like a madman. Is all I can say. Anyway, we've got a cracker of a show tonight, haven't we?
We do. We are going to be talking all about exorcisms tonight, and we are joined in the studio by Reverend David Parry.
Dun, 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 dun. Happy New Year, Kerry and Paul, and Happy New Year, listeners.
Happy New Year to you. Yeah.
Well, last time you came on, David, it absolutely fascinating talk. We were talking about Gnosticism, and within that, you were talking about a situation in regards to a spirit attachment that a friend of yours had. Now, we wouldn't mention names. We're not going to mention names, but that's kind of, as I was listening back to that, I was thinking, I really want to talk to you about that because that's a concept that is hitting the media, or was hitting the media last year so hard. You were seeing live streams on it. You were seeing loads of YouTube videos of people being exorcised. So I thought it was about time that we actually addressed this particular issue. And what better to actually talk to somebody who's actually got experience with that?
Oh, my Lord. How do I live up to that? You'll have to remind me which case that was. I mean, in my line of work, there's more than one. I mean, this sort of stuff crops up quite a bit, which is actually quite disturbing, a lot more than it used to. And I've also got the confession, I suppose. I mean, apart from being an ordained Gnostic priest, I'm actually also an ordained Old Catholic priest. Old Catholic means that we are recognised by Rome, but not Romans. We split with them in the 1800s because we didn't like all this papal infallibility malarkey. So they said, OK, go your way, and we did, but we're all sort of friends. And, I've got friends in the Roman Church, some of which are very highly placed, including one, you've got me as well. I've got to be careful about names to a certain extent. One who studied under the Exorcist, who was involved in the original case of The Exorcist, which became a book and a movie. And actually it was a boy, and it started after they were doing reckless experiments, whatever that means, with the Ouija board. I'm not numero uno exorcist by any stretch of the imagination, but, you brush up against it a lot, and I can't help being a bit disturbed. I mean, they're all too trigger-happy in Rome. There are people that are very, very skilled and highly experienced exorcists in Rome at the moment that are saying, bloody everything needs exorcism. No. There are wonderful scientific advances. Every single thing has to be embraced. All this multiple personality stuff. It's all absolutely fascinating. And if there's something beyond all of that, that's when you start talking about this stuff. So for me, they're a bit trigger happy. But I can't help noticing, with all of those caveats in place and all of those thoughts on my mind, that it's developing, it's growing as a field, and the number of cases is getting actually quite disturbing. I mean, someone threw a figure at me the other day. Since the 1970s, cases in the Western Anglophone world of exorcism, in other words, people saying they've got symptoms beyond a medical condition that they need help with, has gone up by 50%. And that, in case the listeners didn't hear me, yes, 50%. So, something very weird is going on. And it's something we've got to be careful of. God, I don't know what you two think of that.
What is it then? Is it actual spirit attachment, or is it the pressures of today's society, and it's actually more of a psychological effect that people are having? I mean, I have a belief, personal belief, that there are entities out there that can affect your well-being, and you can deal with that on your own without actually necessarily having to go to a church or something like that. So how much of this is down to psychological belief system scenario?
Well, I mean, we've got to remember that the belief in negative energies, unclean spirits, has been in every culture at every time throughout history. Therefore, it's not a Christian hangover, because you get exactly the same phenomena in Judaism, you get it in Islam, you get it in Hinduism, you get it in Chinese Taoism, there are records from the ancient Egyptians about these things, and scriptures whereby these energies are expelled. And of course, the Babylonians had apparently huge trouble with certain entities. Certainly, we have to be careful not to conflate mental disorder with energies and spirit possession, whatever we mean by that. And I think there are entities too. We've got to be very, very careful with that. I mean, there was a guy called M. Scott Peck who wrote a book a couple of years back now called The People of the Lie, where I can't remember what school of therapy he was trained in, that, every now and again he'd come across a case where he'd think, oh my heavens, this isn't something that will surrender to therapy, this is something else. And wrote a series of very, very interesting books on that. But it's not a Christian phenomena per se. It's a human experience which we need to address. And as I say, people, if they go to churches or if they go to mosques or if they go to synagogues, it's because they feel they've run out of medical advice. It's not because they go there first, old auntie Seamus, turns up at the door. Oh, Father, forgive me. You're looking at people who are running out of options. Medical stuff isn't working for them, and maybe the medics themselves don't actually know what's going on. Therefore, you're looking at something very, very mysterious and increasing. So it's got me worried.
Couldn't that increase just be the case that obviously spiritualism and ghost programs on the TV are drawing in that audience, and they're more open to the idea of spirits and stuff and demons, especially with some of the American TVs that shout that stuff out all the time. Yeah. So could they not then just sort of jumble that up? So if there's something wrong with them, then they're going to go to a priest as a first stop, if that makes sense. Yeah,
but you see, that's it. They never go to the priest as the first point of call. They always tend to go to a doctor. We live in the massively secular, medically developed Western world. It's very, very rare that a priest will be the first person they see. And and also priests aren't, there seems to be a weird thing about trained priests in this country. You have to do a degree, otherwise you don't get ordained. And therefore you have to study hard, and you have to know a thing or two about what previous people have done before anybody, including your local bishop, will say, yes, I give you permission to do that. You don't just turn up at somebody's door with a flaming torch waving a crucifix at them, because your bishop would sack you. You get out of my parish, please. What the hell do you think you're doing? Mm-hmm.
In that respect, does the church or the priests in particular work with the medical field?
Mostly,
Because
yes.
if you get someone come up to you and say, "Oh, I think I'm possessed," it could quite easily be something medical.
Any decent priest that I know of, and I'm sure there are non-decent priests out there, so I'm not saying this is the be-all and end-all. Yeah, they'll say go to a doctor. Go to a doctor and see what they say. They won't suddenly chain you to a pew and start waving hands all over you. That is what they won't do, because they get in trouble themselves. And quite rightly, that's not professional. If the person in question, the person that feels troubled, does go to a doctor and the doctor prescribes maybe, medicants, chemical medicines, maybe something stronger than that, and there's still felt to be a problem, that tends to be nowadays in Europe, in Britain and Europe, when the church will consider getting involved. But nowadays it takes an awful lot for any trained priest, and not everybody has the gift. I mean, certainly in the various Catholic and Orthodox traditions, you have to have a charism, a gift for that sort of thing. In other words, you have to have special training on top of all the other training that you've done. You don't just turn up at the local parish priest store and, you get a quick exorcism, and a Cupid doll and a can of Coke on the way out. That's not what happens. What they have to do is seek an official exorcist. Not every diocese or parish has an official exorcist. So sometimes someone will have to be sent in. And then it's a question of a team being assembled, which have to read the medical reports, which have to talk to the person claiming to have these sorts of symptoms, and then an assessment is made. So there's nothing, sort of wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, about all this. Certainly not nowadays. If there ever was, I mean, it's fashionable because of certain Hollywood productions and certain things on TV to think, every priest is constantly looking for a demonic possession to prove they're in the right. But the reality is actually quite the reverse from that. And these things are taken very, very seriously and professionally as and when a case arises. Therefore, the fact so many extra cases are being seen to arise, I mean, I completely agree. The public perception of these things is much greater than it ever was before in some ways. In other words, it's on TV screens, it's in major motion pictures. But, these things are part and parcel, sadly, of community life everywhere, as I was saying earlier, of all times in history. Therefore, on another level, there's nothing new about it. The fact that people feel so unprepared for dealing with these things nowadays. I mean, I do a lot of work with Central Asia. There is a shaman nearby most of the cities, or, a village. I mean, I did some amazing travels in the middle of nowhere, and you'll find a shaman nearby who will come and be able to deal with these things. But, I think, are people more suggestible? Well, I mean, are they more suggestible than in the past? I mean, this is secular Britain, party central in the new decade of a new millennium. I'm not so sure that's true. Certainly people are looking for excitement more than they used to be, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, I don't think many people risk life, limb, and the possible sacking from a job by going around saying crazy stuff like, by the way, I might be possessed. Because, of course, there are, social repercussions, there are career repercussions, there are family repercussions. If you start throwing around things like that, you've got to be prepared for the backlash, which will always happen.
So what is the process then if you got approached by somebody approached by a family member that was worried about somebody, and they thought they'd gone through the medical profession, they'd gone through all of that, and they actually were starting to think that that was something beyond a medical condition? What is the process that you would go through?
Wow. Well, as I was saying a bit earlier, I'm more familiar with the Catholic process than the other processes. And I think it's the same in the Lutheran Church. I think it's roughly similar to what the rabbis do. Basically there'll be an original, an assessment. People will look at what the medics are saying. People look at what the family's saying. There'll be an interview where the person who is being troubled by whatever is going on has a lengthy discussion with the exorcist and their team. And then it will be, if people decide to go further with that, it can either take a very proactive form, where, there are sort of prayers that are said, the anointing of oil, or it can be a very gentle process where a higher power is asked to eject this troublesome power. So, there are ceremonies for extreme cases. I mean, as I say, when we were looking at the original story, remembering the real story of The Exorcist that became the movie, that went the whole hog. And the young boy in question really did feel that the situation was out of control, and so did his family, and so did the medics around him. And, you get the whole bell, book and candle thing at that particular juncture. It's reported, I wasn't there, so I can't say yes, it happened. I can't say no, it didn't happen. But one of the most reliable priests I know, who's a Jesuit, told me that there were all types of things going on, including telekinesis, levitations. And, that's when maybe you need the more proactive versions of expelling the demon with the words of Christ, with the words of Scripture, with the words of the saints, and the anointing and the laying on of hands. And not just gentle prayers like the Our Father, the Paternoster, or the Apostles' Creed recited by the side of the person requiring assistance. So it can be an all guns blazing ceremony, but more often than not, even if it's agreed to go ahead with these things, it tends to be very, very gentle prayer. I mean, I think most of the models come from the rabbinical tradition anyway. You'll have the official exorcist who will have his team. I mean, in the rabbinical tradition, 12 guys, like elders of a church, elders of a synagogue, who can be trusted, who are down to earth, who, they know a bit about life, and they can just bring a bit of gravity and reality into the situation, whereby the troublesome energy is surrounded. I mean, what the assistants of the rabbi do is surround the person in a circle while the rabbi chants from the Old Testament. That's very, very rare in the Catholic tradition, although that can happen. But it tends to be, as I say, more like a sort of Lutheran, gentle, you're in the wrong place, you're at the wrong, you're in the wrong juncture, you shouldn't be here, there's a dislocation, remove yourself to where you should be. And that, of course, is because there's a recognition that most of these cases are things that have gone wrong. They're not actual demonic attacks. I was cheeky in putting an advert for this show on Facebook saying I was talking about demons, this evening. Actually, that's very rare. It can be possession by a person. It can be by the deceased, or it can be by a non-human entity, they say, who is not a demon. Therefore, again, a lot of the time people, I'm told, are dealing with entities that are not demonic, and it's very, very rare that actual demonism is the case that is being challenged. That's the entity, the type of entity that's under scrutiny.
That is one thing I think that people sort of don't always understand, is that an attachment can happen through various forms, not just by the demonic, and that word is being so overused in the paranormal field at this moment in time. It's untrue. Not to discount those entities at all, because my belief system is that they are out there and you have to be aware of them, but that you can be attached by a loved one or an elemental or something like that to you that will have an effect on you, but not necessarily. How difficult is it? This is from Ness Watts in the chat room. Good evening, chat room, by the way. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. It is how difficult is it to tell the difference between mental health and possession?
Well, I think you'd have to be a psychiatrist to answer that. Psychiatrists look for symptoms of a disorder which is crippling somebody's life. I mean, I'm unusual as a cleric in the sense that I've read Freud and I've read Jung, and I find all that incredibly interesting. What they're looking for is answers. They don't say they've got all the answers, but they do say they're onto something. All of the cases they deal with, and Freud actually was a lot less successful than Jung. Jung, of course, was the son of a minister, and there were mediums in his family, so he always felt very at home with all this stuff. Certainly, what the medical profession does is look for problematic symptoms which are probably from a neurosis, some sort of neurotic cause. Therefore, they'll talk about dreams. They'll talk about unusual, abnormalisms in behavior. Somebody gets up and they sit down, and they get up and they sit down for no reason whatsoever, ADHD sort of thing. And they will try and trace that all the way through. That has to be added on to the fact that, why did psychoanalysis start in the first place? Because all these young men came back from World War I, and the chemical medicines weren't working. Therefore, it was a courageous young Freud that said, look, we've got to have a different way of dealing with all of this. And we've got to admit that sometimes the chemical medicines don't work. Certainly, sadly, in Britain, there tends to be the culture still throw chemicals at it and it will go away, which is just brutish. You wouldn't even get that in the States, and they can be pretty brutish. Love you, America, love you, but let's face it. And then they're passed on to a shrink, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, who will tend to be much more nuanced in looking for disorders from a neurotic cause. If you're a Freudian, that tends to be some sort of sexual imbalance, an imbalance in the libido. If you're a Jungian, it tends to be some sort of personality disorder. But if you're dealing with something that's claiming a separate personality and a separate existence, that's when those systems start falling into their own limitation, and other resources should be called in. Personally, I think you need all of it. I don't think it should be an either or. Just go to Father O'Flanahan. He'll sort it all out. I think that's wrong, But it's equally wrong to think that a psychiatrist, no matter how skilled, has the answer to everything. Therefore, for me, it's a continuum dealing with, spiritual as well as mental health for a human being. I hope that answers that. I don't know. Does that answer?
It is an incredibly difficult field. One of the, while I was having a quick look around earlier on about this particular topic, one of the explanations was given in regards to something like schizophrenia. The voices are inside your head, whereas if it was an entity, it would be coming from external of your head. But then I go back to, is it an externalisation of an internal process that we're projecting? Is kind of the question that I was asking at that point to the TV, as you do. So how much is that an externalisation, do you think? Do you think it is, or is it a separate entity attachment? And have you come across a separate entity attachment?
Right, I'm gonna answer this in two ways. First of all, I'm an openly gay pastor, and don't forget, a couple of centuries ago, I'd have been diagnosed as having a disorder. Mm-hmm. So it depends the time frame you live in. Nowadays, we all know that's rubbish, but in some parts of the world to this very day, if you come out, if you come in the open and say that, they will think it's demonic possession. So we've got to be careful. The history of science and the medical profession move on, and they advance and they evolve, and that's important. But it doesn't necessarily mean these cases are going away. As I say, there's a massive increase in them at the moment. Also, I embrace all of it. Abraham Maslow, the idea of multiple personalities, and the fact that, we do externalize the internal, and the internal is much more complex than people would have dreamt of in the past. Did they have huge knowledge in the past? I've absolutely no doubt of that. But that's not saying we don't know anything now. And, I do believe that the physical sciences, the practical sciences have evolved way beyond anything our ancestors could have dreamed of. But, the danger with our present culture is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Oh, they knew nothing. Well, actually, they did. They knew a great deal. They just knew about different things, and they talked about them in different ways. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I grew up in Hampshire. I'm an Hampshire lad. Strong in the arm. And there was, I went to school in Portsmouth, which was quite a trek in those days. And there was a minister, and again, I've got to be careful not to mention too many names, who didn't know what he was doing, but he was giving out light. And the congregation would, every single Sunday, have an explosion of genuine paranormal, in-your-face, all guns blazing events. The chap was a holy man, but he simply didn't know what he was doing. And it got to the stage where people would be at the top of tenement buildings, blocks of flats, and see golden bodies floating past the window. And it was getting so scary, the police closed it down. You know, what happens if there's most of the time, if there's a genuine explosion of the real paranormal, the police get involved and everybody's told to move on. That's what happened. Personally, from individual experience, I do believe there are all sorts of entities in this wonderful glittering continuum of ours that are not human or that have been human, some of which will never be human. And they interact with us sometimes. You know, we're sort of in a no man's land, aren't we? Between the world of darkness, which we don't know hardly anything about, and the world of light, which we equally know hardly anything about. And, you know, they're getting on with their own business. Are they at war? Is there war in heaven? Some people say there is. You know, but even if that's the case, you know, sometimes entities pass through our no man's land and cause a bit of a fuss, and they go about their business and they go somewhere else. So I personally do think there are non-human entities that are interfering sometimes or simply passing through our part of the continuum. But that doesn't mean I don't think that human beings aren't immensely complex creatures and way more than we think at the moment. We're much more complex than we think we are. Therefore, I imagine all of these things have a grain of truth in them. You know, and it's not an either or. It's not, oh, that must be rubbish because. And I noticed that the best people with the charism of exorcism that I've met, as well as some of the psychologists I've met, will never say, oh, that's rubbish because. They're open and they listen a lot. And that, I think, you know, is my own guide in this particular field. If the experts on both sides are open to new information, I think it's up to me to be open to that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Oh dear, everyone's gone quiet.
No, fascinating. Fascinated listening to this perspective on it, because it's very rarely that you get a chance to get this kind of discussion going with people that know what they're talking about. You know, it's absolutely fascinating to me. Now, you said that there's a 50% increase in cases going on. Is this because people are dabbling in things they don't understand, which is linked to decline in general religious belief system? Now, there's a question for you.
Yeah, you know, who's to blame for people leaving the church? The church is to blame for that. You know, you've been given a handful of miracles and you managed to bore people to death for an hour and a half on a Sunday. How that occurs, I've absolutely no idea at all. You know, so you give people the secrets of the universe and they manage to bore everybody with it. So that's extraordinary in its own right. I personally, this is where, if any clerics are listening, don't jump on me. I personally don't really see any problems with Ouija boards. I mean, if you go back to Victorian London, you know, it was a parlour game at the end of somebody's dinner party. So you'd all gather around the Ouija board and, you know, ask great Auntie Dorothy who'd passed on 70 years before what she thought, and then she'd give her 5 pence. You know, so I can't, you know, I know some people in the Bible Belt, but they aren't always the nicest people, let's face it. You know, they think it opens the doors of hell itself. I mean, grow up, for God's sake. You know, with the state the world's in at the minute, please grow up. And if you're looking for evil, that really isn't where it's coming through. We can see where it is. We can see where it's coming through. You know, dark forces are plaguing Australia at the moment. All that wildlife is dying for no reason. Hardly anybody's helping. You know, there we are. There's evil and misunderstanding. You know, not some bloody Ouija board, for heaven's sake. Certainly also the traditional function of the church, whereby they would give counselling, and I mean in a technical medical sense, that has partially left the church. And why not? You know, so you have counsellors nowadays who are trained medical practitioners. You have all sorts of therapists, and more power to them. Some of the most spiritual people I've ever met were actually Rogerian therapists and they do an incredibly good service to the community. And, you get Jungians, who are practically mystics in disguise. So partly it's where these things have taken some steps outside the church. The church itself is going through, excuse me, a redefining stage of what it's doing. Is it there as people, my friends in the Bible Belt will be hunting me down by the time the show is over. Is it really, just swallowing a doctrine and then doing what you're told? I mean, is it really that? Or is it something else? But anyway, that's an internal problem for Christianity. What are we doing and why are we doing it? But no, I don't even blame secularism, curiously. I think that's the spirit trying to spiritualize matter. We're trying to work out what is of real value and what's of not real value. Ecology came from the secular sciences. It didn't come from the religious sciences. And shame on all of us, because it should have been that way round. And, the level of spirituality, I mean, believe it or not, I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, who were going to, I did a 10X talk in late last year. God, was it November or December? November, I think. And they were all going to storm the building until I said because they were at an encampment up in Trafalgar Square. We were at the Royal Society of Arts. And I had to write them a letter saying, well, there's actually no point storming the building because I'm a member and somebody else is a member too. So we're already there. So, no, I don't think it's where the church is so completely off kilter. The church is going through a time of much overdue personal reflection. What is it doing? What are we all doing? Until we recover the shamanistic, which we should do inside our own buildings, and we discover the wisdom that's been given to us again, and not just thoughts rammed down somebody's throats, then people will try and find spirituality and solace elsewhere. I find this an incredibly spiritual country, but not a religious country.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad, because, you should be able to go to a place. I mean, my church is open to everything. We have yoga, we have meditation, we have everything. You should be able to go to a place where the minister says, I will help you do what you need to do for your spiritual journey. That is my view of where we need to get to. And of course, that would welcome back the psychologists, the counsellors, into a safe and caring environment whereby these things can be discussed very, very seriously, as they should be. But I suspect we're looking at 20 years ahead. We're not looking at the moment. So as I say, and America's an incredibly religious country, not always in the right way. All right, Bible Belt, let's go for it. My favourite is, Christians Against Dinosaurs. God's sake, grow up.
What?
Against dinosaurs. Since dinosaurs aren't mentioned in the Bible, they can't exist. And actually, I can think of a few references which I could very easily think are to do with dinosaurs if we want to go down that route. So we've got to stop this nonsense and start thinking, what is a sacred scripture and what is it meant to be doing? How is it functioning? Is it revealed? Is it inspired? What does that mean? Therefore, America, as the so-called ultimate, secular capitalist society, is actually very religious. And I find Britain a very spiritual country. I mean, I'm one of the few clergy that's actually encouraged by what's going on at the minute. And I'm encouraged by shows like this, and I'm encouraged by the paranormal community. I tend to be a bit harsh with them sometimes. But that's because, it's like great Aunt Dottie, there's a cold wind in the corner of the room. Oh, my God, it's a ghost. No, it's a cold wind. So I get a bit irritable with that sort of thing. But the absolute, essential nature of shows like this, paranormal discussion, paranormal investigation, and people looking into all of these things, no matter what started the interest, whether it's a movie, whether it's a program, is all absolutely great, because it's extending our consciousness and it's helping us become more human.
Paul?
Absolutely. No, I do exactly. I know exactly where you're coming from in that respect. I often think the same things, to be fair. I think where I'm learning more about the paranormal and stuff, it does cross over a lot with religion. And I think that's what I find really intriguing. Because you can go back to the priest or whatever for what my church, and they're like, no, we don't believe in that sort of thing. It's like, well, you sort of, the whole basis of the religion is sort of Jesus rising from the grave and like coming, you've got the Holy Spirit and stuff like that, and it's like, well, surely that's no different.
Well, don't forget, it went out. The church has financial problems, right? If you're going to have an official exorcist, they need to be paid. People can't survive in a world like this and not be paid unless they're going to be monks.
No.
So they're not, there's no access to them because they're monks. So we've all got to be a bit more realistic about the fact, yes, these things, there are resources that need to be used to maintain these services. And I mean services in both of those words. Therefore, I think that was in the 50s, the early 60s, where, diocesan and parish accountants, and maybe I can see the reasoning behind it, but I'm not sure I can, if I'm honest, started saying, well, let's cut this. Why do we need this? Because there's, schools need to be maintained. We've got to do the work at the hospitals. We don't have enough money. So where should these resources be spent? And it tended to be on the much more practical, down-to-earth stuff, which is why there are parish or diocesan exorcists, but sometimes they are very far away and they have to be called in from that distance. Certainly, I think that, that's short-sighted. I mean, there are clearly stories in the scriptures of demonic possession. There are also accounts of Jesus Christ dealing with those things. I mean, what interested me when I started looking at those scriptures again before coming on the show, was the first thing Jesus Christ would say to the unclean spirit is silence. So in other words, it can't speak any lies anymore. It can't mix up goodness and badness anymore. It's then stopped. It can't communicate. It's stopped. Its way of dealing with the people around it is come to a halt. And then he always asks its name. What is thy name? And because he is who he is, it must give its name. And that's the point at which it's expelled. I mean, the Gadarene swine come to mind. There was an unfortunate who had multiple demonic possession. And Jesus Christ expels the demons into a herd of swine that then rush over a cliff and drown themselves. So, it's, no one can say those stories aren't in there. And certainly some people would say they're symbolic. They're symbolic. But that doesn't mean they're only symbolic. And certainly I think it's very unwise of the church to have abandoned, which it has done to a certain extent, abandoned the notion of the supernatural. I've got a problem with vocabulary at this point. The paranormal word, words like paranormal, paraphysical, supernature, which was, of course, a brilliant book by Lowell Watson many years ago, tend to be where you've abandoned the idea of another realm. So, they're extensions of the physical world. They're unusual, highly rarefied energies that we will get to know one day and we'll be able to, harness, whatever. Notions of the supernatural are actually claiming, or the transdimensional, if you want to use a very modern word for that, they tend to be where we're dealing with more than one world. I personally, I'm going to get into loads of trouble for saying this, I personally feel a lot of the churches have abandoned a supernaturalist outlook, which I think is a travesty because it's clearly there in Scripture, as it is in every other world religion. There are worlds that are not this one, and those worlds interpenetrate sometimes. What interests me about the UFO phenomena, a confession. In 1976, that entire summer was me seeing balls of light. I've also seen a UFO, an actual silvery disc. I was in secondary school in Hampshire, and I stopped believing in education that day. We saw this massively beautiful silvery disc glittering in a clear sky in the sunlight, absolutely silent. We rushed to get the teacher. They wouldn't come out because it was break time. Don't you know we're having tea? We all went to look. Yeah, we all looked at it as it floated away, and when we all got back into the classroom, the first thing that was said was, and nobody's going to talk about UFOs. So I stopped believing in, I mean, I did reasonably well, but I stopped believing in official education that day. You know, we live in a complex, multi-leveled universe, and there's more than one dimension, and the minute that perspective arises, that's when the older scriptures start gaining relevance and perspective once again. My trouble with the paranormal community, and it's said with love as someone that really supports everybody's work, whether people understand it or not, is the limitation in the vocabulary. Maybe there is more than just an extension to the natural order. Maybe there are other natural orders. You know, there's something to throw
I think that is more down to interpretation. Because again, I go to church occasionally, and the vicar that we talk to is quite open-minded, and he'll take on any ideas and stuff that we talk about. But he's always said that the Bible is open to interpretation.
Yeah.
So so people could quite easily look at certain aspects of the Bible and say, well, okay, that could relate to aliens. That's what it says to me.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I can understand exactly where you're coming from with this.
Yeah, you know, people, what clergymen have got to stop doing is telling people what to understand. You know,
yeah.
You go through the scripture with people, you give your understanding of scripture as a religious professional, but you let people, discern it themselves. There is no other way. We're all sons and daughters of the Most High. There is no other way, and any other way is wrong. And you notice Jesus Christ himself did not do that. If Jesus Christ is our model, then do as he does. He never does anything like that. Let people grow at their own pace, at their own speed. That's when we start getting to the kingdom.
No, again, I totally understand that, because again, my vicar is more. He doesn't, although obviously he gives us the information. The way he does it is almost like this is the information, but I'm helping you understand it.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's not telling us. He's just, do you know what I mean? Just guiding us and helping us learn and understand what he's talking about. And so we do come to our own, our own ideas and stuff. Which that's why I like going. So.
Oh no, Paul! It sounds like you've got a good one there. I keep hold of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to exorcism, would it? This is from Richard Clements in the chat room. Would it be correct to say that generally individuals that claim to be possessed tend to believe in possession in the first place?
Oh God, that's one of those general questions, isn't it? I don't know. I've not asked them. Again, that sounds to me like, is this actually a medical disorder question? My aunt used to believe in possession, but she was never possessed. I don't know is the answer to that. Do you have to have that belief before you're possessed? If there are actual real entities out there that don't want your prospering, then no, you don't. If you're vulnerable to their attack, they will attack you whether you believe it or not. I don't think people need to believe it if there are external entities who have found a way in and want to attack. Those are very rare cases, according to M. Scott Peck, but even he, as a psychiatrist, says they are there. If anything, I think maybe that belief makes you a bit more vulnerable, but, I don't know. I don't know is the answer to that.
Okay. So is there levels then to possession? So can you be, influenced rather than fully fledged possessed by a spirit or an entity?
Most of it comes down to that, Karen. People think, demons, they say, find it extraordinarily difficult to do more than influence. After all, you're built in the image of God. We're all sons and daughters of God. They can't really deal with that. What they can do is mislead and trick. certainly I would probably suspect that the vast majority of cases, I mean, a dear friend of mine is Alan Cox. Do you know Alan Cox?
Yeah, he's lovely.
Yeah. And he's a sweetie. He's my dear friend. I mean, a demon went into him at one point, and his guides had to drag it out. And he told me, "Oh God, Alan, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I don't know if I should have said this or not." Because he said his voice changed and his look changed, but he worked so closely with his guides that they nicked him and they dragged the swine out. And he would say, it's a very, very rare and special gift to be an exorcist. I mean, he doesn't even like calling it exorcism. He likes calling it healing. And that of course, is biblical. They wouldn't have said exorcist, mostly. They'd have said healers. But, he would say, no, mostly it's them putting in thought patterns, sometimes into the aura, not the brain. And the thing trickles down because it's trying to trick you on a number of levels. So I suspect most of it is some sort of demonic or negative influence. I suspect the whole shooting match is incredibly rare.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think the influence is more insipid than a full-blown possession.
Yeah. Okay, well, what about then if it's what it would be the effect? Say, for example, like we know that there's loads of different civilizations out there, and say, for example, they've all got their own versions of different demons. So you've got this Norse demon that wants to attach itself or attack someone. How would you get rid of that? Because when you go in and say, I don't know, like in the films, like the power of Christ compels you and all that sort of stuff, it's the Christian faith that you're using to try and get the spirit out, but he's not of that faith.
Right, again, two answers to that. Mostly these are the same energies, but with different names and different cultural baggage ascribed to them. So what is called Odin in one culture, that energy will be called by another name, but it's the same energy in a different culture. Okay. Curiously, a couple of years ago, I was asked to perform an exorcism on a very respected academic who felt a jinn because he converted to Islam. A jinn was mocking him. Again, I don't really want to give names because I don't know how open he wants this story to be. But certainly he approached me and said, you've got this type of background. What can you do? And I was very skeptical that anything needed to be done. I didn't quite know what was happening, an unfolding story over afternoon tea. So all I did was sit and listen. Yeah. And he got out an ordinary cup that looked like some sort of cup from old Woolworths when it was going, some sort of fake Chinese Ming, plaster nothing or other. And he said, what do you think of that? Do you think that's an antique cup? And I didn't know what to say. And the other guy's losing his marbles. And I said, well, no, I don't think that. It's, a very, very cheap sort of cup that you could get anywhere. And he said, it used to be a very, very expensive classical Chinese cup. And it was remolded nearly in front of him by the jinn to mock him. I didn't know what to say, because I know this person is a very serious person and not given to extravagances of the mind. A very disciplined and clever guy. What I did was contact some friends of mine in a local mosque, and we talked about it together. Curiously, they felt there was something worth investigating. They didn't rush round to his house waving the Quran. That is what they didn't do, because they're as sensible and serious as everybody else. They did feel we all needed a meeting to discuss what should be done if something needs to be done. Because, of course, they were also of the mind that the jinn, they're playing tricks all the time. Do they have that powers? Do they have those powers? Yes and no, but not over human beings, because we're built in the sacred image. But curiously, his work took him back to Scotland. We all lost touch, and I don't know how that story ended, but certainly he felt his health was failing. He felt his fortunes were dwindling because of the almost mocking, humorous malevolence of this jinn. And I've heard other jinn stories from my Islamic friends that are very, very, very disturbing. Don't forget, jinns would not be demons. There are good jinns as well as there are bad jinn.
Yeah.
So, you're looking at, but for some reason, only God knows, only Allah is aware of, the bad jinns tend to be the powerful ones. So I learned a bit about, what they think of jinn in the Islamic world. But as I say, the case fell apart. The scenario fell apart because we lost track with the friend, and I wish we hadn't, because maybe that did need to be dealt with.
Do you think that perception is key in this? You said that the bad jinn seem to be the more powerful. Could it be that the good jinn are just as powerful, we just don't recognise that as power?
Oh, gosh, isn't that a good question? I think there's something in Hollywood. They are giving the impression more and more that there are two equal forces, good and evil, but actually evil's a bit stronger, isn't it? No, of course it isn't. Are there two Manichaean forces? Is there a principle of light constantly at war with a principle of darkness? Maybe. I don't know. I think you're onto something there, Kerry. I think we constantly underrate the abilities of the good and the bright and the true to deal with the situation. In my experience in these fields, the powers of light don't like intruding. The powers of darkness, by definition, don't care. But the powers of light need to be encouraged. They need to be invited. You have to work with them. Otherwise, of course, they're the powers of darkness. If you work with them, then I suspect everything balances out. No, I mean, the light is at least as equally powerful as the dark. And of course, in the Abrahamic faiths, you'd say ultimately there's a judge above both of them who is the strongest of all. I think you're really onto something there. I mean, some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in the last couple of years were actually Wiccans, who struck me as incredibly deeply spiritual. They were clearly influenced by the light in everything that they did. I don't think they'd have had any of these problems because they stood firmly in themselves and they knew that the light was with them. So, I agree with that 100%. Let's not underrate the light. And our guardian angels and our spirit guides, they're all there and they're all working with us and they're working for the good.
I totally agree with that. I think that's very underrated. We talk about it a lot, but there's a lot of talk and not necessarily a lot of walk. And so going on, do you think then if you feel that you have some form of negative influence coming at you from an external perspective, can you control that? Have you got self-responsibility that you can deal with that yourself?
Oh, that's the missing word from our culture at the moment, responsibility. Go and have a drink. 9 times out of 10, it's where you're down and you're depressed and you're tired, and that's part of life. Go and have a drink, meet your friends, have a party, and shake it off. If you feel there's something more than that, maybe then you talk to people you trust. You talk to uncles, you talk to aunties, you talk to people with a lot of life experience and see what they say. If you think there's still something that needs adjusting, then maybe you book an appointment with a counsellor and say, look, I'm experiencing this oppression. I mean, that's half the secret of what's going on in the West at the moment. Spiritual oppression, not possession. It's oppression that's the problem. And say to the counsellor, I really feel things aren't working through. I feel oppressed. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on. And if you still think there's something that really needs much more fundamental adjusting, then I think you should consult a priest. I think it has to be done in that particular way. Otherwise, you're not really taking the responsibility of your own issues and your own problems, and you're rather inflicting them on other people. We all need help from time to time, and it's good. We should all be willing to say when we need help. We should all be willing to get help and give help. But, let's be more mature, particularly maybe if, as some people are saying, most of the time we're looking at various types of spiritual oppression and we're not actually looking at other things. We're looking at that.
Totally agree with that one. Now, before we let you go, because we are coming to the end of the show, David, you sent me a link to your website, davidwilliamparry.com. I've shared the link into the chat room for you guys. And you've got a new book out. We're going to reference this book, but we're going to get David on. God, I always want to call you William. We're going to get David back on to talk about... I'll call you anything. To talk about this specifically, because this is a fascinating one. What's your new book on?
Well, it's called Mount Athos Inside Me, because as I say, I'm interested in all this psychological stuff too. The subtitle is The Giveaway. It's the big reveal. Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and Arts. Now, of course, Swedenborg is probably a unique global phenomenon. A guy, a naturalist, a highly trained scientist who started having visions of the spirit world. And like a naturalist, he documents them for 30 years. I can't think of any guy in any other culture that's done anything like that. He goes on astral journeys, etheric journeys. He goes to heaven worlds. He goes to hell worlds. And he interviews some of the entities he speaks to. And he writes down the answers they give to him. So that guy seriously fascinates me. I used to go to Young Club London. I don't have the chance to go much nowadays. He's sort of big news there. I mean, they see it obviously as, the creative imagination, maybe sometimes something to do with dreams, maybe something to do with the collective unconscious. And perhaps they're right. But certainly Swedenborg, he was so eminent in his day, the Swedish government gave him the surname Swedenborg, to honour him. So they certainly were very impressed by what he did, even though they didn't really understand it. And, these documents need searching. They need studying, and they need to be revealed. I mean, he's to a larger reading public, because he's saying be very careful of this stuff. But if you're really interested, give it a go and see what happens, because there are miracles out there, and they're inside you, but not inside you. And it's that sort of stuff that intrigued me. So that's roughly what the new book's about.
And that's an ethos that goes through, again, many cultures, isn't it? From inside to external, from above and below. It's that there's a little bit of us in it and there's a little bit of them in us. It's that ethos that runs through multiple cultures across the globe, and something we are going to be exploring on Parasearch in shows to come. Absolutely fascinating, but we're going to get you on for a whole show on that, because that, like you say, is an incredibly fascinating discussion in itself. Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kerry, as you haven't spoken much tonight, what's coming up for next week?
Shush.
Oh, I'm sorry, is that me? Oh, God.
No, that's a dig at me.
No,
Don't
Kerry.
you worry, that's a little dig at me right there. He knows what I'm like when we get a topic like this. I get the bit between my teeth and no one else gets a word in edgeways generally, i.e. Paul. It's all right, he can talk on the next show, it's fine. Tomorrow night on Parasearch Radio, we've got Haunted Histories kicking off at 9 p.m. She has got LJ Wilgress in the studio talking all about the Louis Lane murder, which happened in Diss, Norfolk. A cold case that happened back in 1829. Fascinating story, that one. Definitely listen to that. On Thursday evening, PSH Radio, I've got Anna Prada Frias from Proof Paranormal Investigations, who's a psychic medium based in Las Vegas. Love a bit of the American contingency coming through. Then on Friday evening, The Dark Mirror Show, we are looking at the influence of music in the paranormal. All different kinds of things on the table for that one. That's going to be an interesting discussion. Saturday, 5 p.m, on the Parasearch Radio group page on Facebook, you've got Penny's Q&A. So if you want to ask her a question, that's where you need to be on Saturday. And then on Sunday evening, I've got a conversations with interview with the lovely paranormal blogger Sarah Chimisero, all the way over from Australia. And we will be having a little discussion, quick discussion about what the situation is ecologically over there in Australia as well. So a full week of shows for you guys.
Fantastic. Sounds good. Starting off really well this year.
we're going to continue it as well. Hell yeah.
Absolutely. And I know myself and Richard are off on a road trip again this weekend, but we're going to go for the whole weekend. So we're going to end up, I think, in Cambridge for the first trip in 2020. So next week we'll be talking about that on air, on the show. And Kerry's going to be interviewing us. Oh
my goodness. That'd be an easy one.
That's what I've decided anyway. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us in the chat room. We're definitely at the end of the show now, so say good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. And good night from me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.